Right, welcome back to the Carnivore and Beyond podcast. And this week I've got Tristan Haggard on. Well, this month actually, they're pretty much monthly at the moment. But Tristan, Tristan was one of the first people. Well, he was the first person who ever gave me an interview about health. You know, it was the first chat I ever had. I went on Tristan's channel, and I've been a fan for a while, and so it's entirely his fault that I've become the subject of death threats from vegans and stuff like that. I blame him entirely.
Yeah, I take full responsibility for everything you've done on the internet. I take credit for all.
He's thrown me into the limelight. It's been horrific.
I get the good thing. I'll take credit for the good things, not all the...
But if any, I mean, everybody probably knows Tristan, but if somebody's looking at this from this sort of spiritual angle from my podcast, you might not do. But Tristan has been a researcher into all sorts of aspects of health and diet and so far beyond. We're going to get into the history of everything and his brilliant uncovering of conspiracies that has had me fascinated for about a year now. He runs Primal Edge Health, which he runs with his Mrs. Jessica, and you've got to check out their keto and carnivore cookbooks. They're absolutely the dog's bollocks. Seriously, go and grab yourself some copies. There's some hilarious content on his videos. He disassembles the vegan agenda so beautifully, and sees far beyond it. He's not just a meat guy by any standards at all. So I'd like to delve into a few things that I haven't really heard him talk about too much. So excuse me if I keep having coughing fits. Even carnivores get sick now and again, so I've got a bit of a chest infection. And so I'm going to keep hitting mute if I start barking like a sea lion. So if you look at it from the hippie point of view, it's probably some autumn equinox detox, or, maybe as we say in the UK, I just sucked a bad cock or something. But anyway, apologies for that. So Tristan, seriously, man, I'm so happy to have you on here, and let's talk about some shite and things and stuff.
Shite and things and stuff. That's what we're all about. That's the tagline of my channel, actually. Shite, things, and stuff.
You know what I wanted to ask you, because I haven't heard you talk about it that much.
Yeah.
Where did all this start? How young were you? When did you have this first interest in health? Also in the whole researching thing, the history thing, spirituality thing. Where was the little budding Tristan start with all this?
Yeah, well, obviously that's a really hard question to answer and completely, right? And I think maybe our perception of that changes as we grow too. We start to see our past a little bit differently in new light. I remember being a little kid and just being so curious, right? Always felt like there was something off, like there's something wrong. I think everybody feels this, like the life is so good. I grew up with pretty good parents. They loved me. They gave me everything I needed. They worked their ass off. But it always felt like there was something off. School. I remember sitting there in school and learning about all sorts of nonsense in a very fragmented, fractured way. Hearing the bell ring. I remember being in 7th grade and learning about Pavlov's dogs in biology class. Ninth grade. Pavlov's dogs. 9th grade, first year of biology. I remember learning about behaviorism and how Pavlov was able to, with a bell, make dogs salivate. And you feed them. After you ring the bell, they start salivating, right? So I remember thinking about this and then hearing the bell ring at the end of 9th grade biology class and just thinking, oh, yeah, wow, yeah, we're being trained in this exact way. And it's an interesting thing when you start to look at the history of some of the ideas that drive modern society. I was always interested in history. How did we get to where we are today? Why are we going to war? Why is the U.S. Sending billions of dollars of explosive freedom to places in the Middle East that I didn't understand a lot of this stuff, but I had a very ravenous curiosity for it. So yeah, I think what I'm getting is I think we all kind of see what's going on. We all inherently are, it's revealed to us all, but I think a lot of us maybe reject it at certain times. We get distracted from what we really see, what we really experience, what we really feel. And, I've been fascinated with history, fascinated with what's going on here and trying to explain and and convey what I perceive as happening in reality. So, yeah, curiosity, confusion, um, uh, all that really kind of haunted me as a kid. You know, I wanted to understand. I wanted to change things. You know, I wanted people to, I don't know, to be happy, to be fulfilled. And yeah, I've always just had this ravenous desire for knowledge and then also for a better situation. So I think when I was a kid, I got involved in, or I got interested in researching history, conspiracy, all these things because of the mysteries of what I experienced and the questions that I had. And then health came in view later on when I was in college. I wrecked my body. I got hit by a car. I hit a car, which hit me back stubbornly, and I had a major injury. I wasn't healing from that, so chronic pain, digestive issues, stuff like that led me to looking into health and then looking into possibly diet playing a part in how our body functions and why we experience things like chronic illness, chronic disease. I had asthma, allergies as a kid. Never got much help from the modern medical system. And, you know, much like the education system, the modern medical system didn't do a very good job of explaining what was really going on. And I think that leads us to dig deeper and to start looking at different, looking at the picture from different angles.
Yeah, cool. Recently I saw one of your vids. Well, I haven't seen it. I saw it some vegan criticizing it when you were talking about veganism and you were really skinny. And it was like, he was just coming to the most ridiculous conclusions. But it's funny. I mean, and he's saying, yeah, oh, right, now he's got to be on the roids. He's got to be on the gear to be able to have got that big. And it's like, man.
What video is that? Is that red pill vegan guy's video?
Yeah, maybe. I can't remember, man. I click through them now.
I put that guy in one of my new videos. You should check out some of these new. They're like mashup videos with commentary, and the commentary is pretty funny. And the sequencing of the clips, it weaves a really funny story. But yeah, that dude's. I think I know who you're talking about. No, it's crazy. I mean, there's little cults that pop up all around diet, and it becomes another false religion. It becomes another lens through which people can project their insecurities, their failures, and you know everything that's going on in the world, everything that's going wrong in the world. They can project through this lens that describes it all, but also in a very incoherent way. So I think we all have a worldview, we all have a paradigm through which we filter reality. Every single one of us has presuppositions about what it is we're experiencing here. We all have basic presuppositions that influence our behaviors, how we experience the world, and how we perceive things around us. And when you get wrapped up in explanations that are very simplistic, like the vegan religion proposes, and the environmentalism that we're being sold, this phony environmentalism that we're being sold now, and of course this kind of perspective of globalism, right? These global crises that are destroying us, and we need to react in a global way. And the only way we can face these existential threats is through coming together to battle these evil forces. So there's so many simplistic explanations that are weaved for the masses in order to essentially control us, very much like behaviorism. And of course, the people who design these programs, they look at it through a worldview of materialism and of scientism, right? They believe that the human organism is just in reaction. Basically, everything we do, every behavior we exhibit is a reaction to external stimulus. So if you can control the external stimulus and control the imprints on the organism, they believe that you can create a perfect society that is ordered in a way that will be essentially controlled, right? And that's kind of the scientific worldview seeks to control through mechanisms, through looking at the world mechanistically and controlling the movement of matter in that world. So I think that's what we're doing right now, is we're living out that worldview. And veganism and phony environmentalism, globalism, these fake economic saviors that we get, global capitalism versus global communism, as if they're any different. We're given these often self-refuting and completely incoherent explanations for what's going on around us, and that informs our behavior on a mass scale. So I think, all these ideas have kind of really fascinated me in general, especially lately as it's becoming more obvious to everybody else, right? Like now, like normal people like my parents, people like just normal people who you would have told this to 10, 15 years ago, and they just said, that's ridiculous. You know, I mean, everything is, this is just how it is. This is just the natural progression of the evolution of society is what we're all led to believe. But there's a lot more to it, and it's a little bit more nuanced, and it's what we see going on around us as far as what ruins our health, what ruins our cultures, our families, and even entire nations, and ruins the ecology around us. I'm very critical of the environmental movement that we see today because it is a completely phony, co-opted movement. That doesn't mean I don't think that we should conserve land, that we should maintain biodiversity, and some of these ideas that get used as Trojan horses. It's not like these are bad things. It's not like protecting the environment and not polluting and getting rid of environmental toxins. I mean, these are all fantastic things, but that's not the real issue here. There are kind of
exactly.
bigger...
Right. I mean, you've really kind of crystallized it for me. I'm an old hippie. I'm too trusting, and I'm really naive. I always smelt a rat. But the way that you've put it together, it's just so obvious. It's just so obvious when you see how all this stuff just ties in beautifully. If you're not using some kind of an ancestral viewpoint on this, you're just not going to see it all. I don't understand. It's like diet. You never understand diet until you understand circadian biology, until you understand anthropology, that kind of thing. And you're never going to understand the climate change thing until you understand that, even if it's true. It's they're using it in the wrong way.
There's so many things that are left out. We have a very simplistic narrative about all this.
Yeah.
Right. So it's like with climate change, just one example of what we get, what gets left out of the narrative is there have been weather modification technologies that have been around. There are patents that go back to the 1920s of how to modify the weather using aerosolized metallic particles sprayed in the upper atmosphere. Everybody knows that silver iodide particles were used in China before the Olympics in 2000. I forget what year it was when the Olympics were in China, to modify the weather. It's openly admitted now that the U.S. government and the State Department, the military, the Air Force, and CIA were involved in weather modification over Vietnam, creating typhoons, creating massive storm surges to interrupt the movement of on the Ho Chi Minh Trail. So we've got, nice, I've got coffee now too. We've got so much information that's readily available to the public, which demonstrates that we do have the ability to change weather, to make mass, large-scale modifications to the weather, geoengineering patents, weather modification patents going back to like Edward Teller, who was actually one of the father of the atomic bomb. We've been using weather modification since the Manhattan Project and before. And yeah, absolutely, we can change the climate. How much climate change is man-made? How much climate change is natural environmental processes? This is what we need to discuss, right? So there's so much nuance that gets bypassed, and you don't hear the weather warfare, the truth about weather being used as a tool of warfare being talked about in these UN delegations that are talking about massive economic measures that are going to fix the climate and save us all by global austerity measures and loans from the IMF that destabilize nations and create situations of economic debt and slavery. We just get sold rhetoric, right? We get sold climate action now. We get sold, we need to do something. All the adults, all the grown-ups need to do something. I'm just a little kid. I'm so scared. Look at this little girl on TV crying. This is a climate crisis. Oh my goodness, they're taking the babies out of the incubators in Iraq and they're throwing them on the floor. Or that I don't know if anybody remembers in 1992, before the first Iraq invasion, there was a little girl that got up in front of the UN saying the Iraqi soldiers are taking the babies from the incubators and they're smashing them on the ground. And she's crying, and it's so visceral and it's so scary. Well, it turns out she was actually the daughter of a diplomat, and this was completely staged and not true. This was a child got up there and lied and acted and was coached for political purposes to invade another country. And we see the same tactics being used over and over again. And we're not discussing the big issues behind this. And I mean, a simple look at some of the organizations that push these ideas like climate change, like the Club of Rome. If you read The First Global Revolution, which is a book by the Club of Rome, The First Global Revolution, a report by the Club of Rome from Bertrand Schneider and Alexander King. I mean, they lay out in here, this is a white paper from an elite organization that includes the heads of a lot of governments, a lot of non-governmental organizations. The Rockefeller Foundation was involved with the Club of Rome, which met in Rome in the early 1970s, and they created a policy paper called Limits to Growth. And it was essentially about stopping the growth of the population. Now, in a later document that came out in 1992, the First Global Revolution document, this came about right before the Rio Summit in 92, where they started talking about environmentalism and started ushering in this idea of ecological justice and of eco-justice and of environmental justice, which sounds great, but then when you look deeper into it, you realize it's the heads of industry that created this ecological devastation. It's companies like BP, it's companies like Shell, it's the IMF, the World Bank, who are pushing for these fake solutions to the crisis that they actually created themselves and are creating the rhetoric for. So if you look at, sorry, I'm going on a really long rant here, and I'm
no, man, this is what I was hoping you would do. It's absolutely spot on. This stuff fascinates me. It freaks me out when people start saying things like denier, you know, so people can't look at the subtleties of this. It's dangerous. It's dangerous. It's great. Yeah,
absolutely.
Uncover. Go for it.
You're a denier.
Yeah.
What we're looking at complex systems that need to be analyzed here, and that's what these big think tanks like the Club of Rome, like the Council on Foreign Relations, like the Royal Institute for International Affairs, these big global think tanks that are that consist of the heads of industry, big finance, and government, all talking about policies for 50, 100 years and even beyond, plans for economic control over the globe. They talk about the systems of religions, food production, governments, economic growth, and these people actually envision and look at. Now, for people who are watching on YouTube, oops, let's see, I might have to change the here. There we go. So you've got this, the web, the wheel of humankind, as the Club of Rome sees it. Global food security, very, very big part of this web of the wheel of humankind. So in this paper, The First Global Revolution, they start talking about all the problems. They formulate this, what they call the world problematique, which is basically what are the global problems that would require a global solution that we can use to manipulate the population into solidarity so that we can have a global mobilization bigger than World War II. And we're talking about a war rhetoric mobilization globally to fight a crisis. So after the war, these big industries, the munitions manufacturers that later became the big agriculture conglomerates like Monsanto, right? Monsanto made Agent Orange during Vietnam. Monsanto was making mustard gas during the World War. Monsanto has a long history of military arms, of making military equipment, and the world problematique that they talk about here in the First Global Revolution essentially ends up. They end up saying that we need a global problem that we can attack at a global level to justify the coming together of mankind. And here on page, I'm trying to find the page, it's like 75. There we go. Page 75, the common enemy of humanity is man. So they say we need a common enemy in order to unite the people. This enemy, in searching for a common enemy against who we can unite, we came up with the idea that pollution, the threat of global warming, water shortages, famine, and the like would fit the bill. In their totality and their interactions, these phenomena do constitute a common threat which must be confronted by everyone together. In designating these dangers as the enemy, we fall into the trap which we have already warned readers about, namely mistaking symptoms for causes. All these dangers are caused by human intervention in natural processes. And it is only through changed attitudes and behaviors that they can be overcome. The real enemy, then, is humanity itself. So these are people who have just declared humanity itself as the enemy and are essentially using propaganda to tell us that that is the case. And we're being propagandized to believe that we are the enemies of the natural order, that we are the enemies of the natural world. And it's this really twisted theology of environmentalism that we're being given now in the mainstream, and veganism has been tied in with this this eco-religion, and we're looking now at the mobilization of the global economy, which is an illusory constructed system of usury and of control over nations and the creation of wars and artificial debt. All of these are tools of this essentially international elite that have consolidated much of the resources, many of the resources on this planet, and are looking at creating a solid state economy global system that is under total technocratic control, using cybernetics, using propaganda, and using a new global religion, which is now coming into view as this eco-religion, which even the Pope is now promoting with his Amazon synod. And yeah, so that's a very broad overview, and I suggest reading The First Global Revolution by the Club of Rome. Another really good one, The Changing Images of Man by Stanford Research Institute. These are both very, very important white papers that have been published by these think tanks, which disseminate global policies based on the worldview that they're promoting here.
Yeah, I've heard you talk about this, and it's amazing. How far back have you seen this go? Where did it all start? Which sort of crazy religious cults and tyrannical rulers have started off feeding the planet on this soylent slop?
Well, I mean, Plato talks about, in his Republic, Plato talks about the use of food to control the masses as well. And he talks about feeding the lower class grains and feeding the lower class mass-produced agricultural products. I mean, this is something that's been around since the dawn of civilization, right? I mean, we're looking at, this is not a new thing, the use of food to control people. I mean, famine has been a weapon of warfare forever. The British Empire has used famine in like the potato crisis as a depopulation tool against problematic populations for a long time. And I mean, I think a good place to start for people to look at the beginnings of this worldview is looking at Darwinism. And when you look at the presuppositions of Darwinism, I mean, these go back to occult philosophies within Freemasonry about the transmutation of souls, and they kind of tie in Hinduism. I mean, you could read Manly P. Hall's book. He's a top-level Freemasonic philosopher. He's a 33rd degree Freemason who published a lot of occult literature as well as lectures in the early 1920s. And Manly P. Hall talks about the connections of this modern scientific worldview that we have been given and that we all assume is true because we've been educated in it. That's a good place to start with questioning that, because through Darwinism you justify all of this behavior. Darwinism perfectly justifies domination and the commandeering of what they see as a process of evolution and the transmutation of species and of societies. They believe that everything is evolving, everything is changing, going from simple forms to more complex forms, and then the creation of these complex forms has eventually allowed man to recognize somehow and take control of these forces of evolution and of environmental control in order to manifest through the organism new forms and new mutations. So Darwinism actually justifies genocide. It justifies, I mean, you can justify anything with a materialistic worldview. So I think that's a good place to start for people to look at. And then, of course, when you start looking at the materialistic worldview, this all is the same presuppositions are there within like Hinduism and animism and a lot of the monistic worldviews where everything is one. Right? If everything is one, if everything is one substance and it's all God and everything is God and the pen is God and I put God, the pen cap on top of God, the pen. If everything is God, then everything is permitted, right? It's kind of a do what thou wilt philosophy, which is Crowleyan philosophy is really big these days. A lot of the celebrities and Hollywood elite are really into these ideas. Thelema, the ideas of the Golden Dawn and a lot of these other esoteric societies kind of permeate society. And when you look at Darwinism, the ideas that are there that justified this British aristocratic worldview that they are the superior, most evolved, most highly advanced people and organisms in the universe, and that they therefore have the right to take control of evolution and control everything. That worldview has been around for a long time, and the roots of that go back, pre-Babylonia. And you look at the story of the Tower of Babel, where the entire world spoke one language, were of one tongue and of one mind, and built this tower that attempted to usurp the power of the Creator and to become like God. And so you see this idea, this revolutionary worldview that is promulgated through Freemasonry, and that now we see, transhumanism being kind of a very big idea that gets pushed. The idea that through technology we're going to become the singularity, and everything, information is going to travel so fast, so we're all going to be wired into each other in this giant hive mind singularity. A lot of these ideas have been around for a very, very long time in various religious orders throughout the planet that we see. So yeah, this essentially, it does all come down to spirituality and theology, right? The scientific worldview is a spiritual worldview. It is it is making transcendental statements. It's making universal statements about reality. The universal statement about reality from the scientific worldview is essentially that everything is material, that everything that can be known through measure, through measuring the natural world and through observation of the natural world. That is the basic presupposition of the scientific worldview. Everything, all knowledge, comes through experience. And how do we know that this is true? Well, through experience. We know this, right? But so they're making the claim that you can know that all knowledge can only come from the physical world and that everything is material. To say that everything is material and that, sorry, let me back this up and land this plane and steer it into the runway here. You make the claim that everything is material. That means that you've quantified everything, right? You're claiming that you've quantified everything. It's self-refuting to say that that all knowledge comes from observation would mean that you've observed all knowledge, right? And that if you say that there are no absolutes, that is an absolute statement. Right? So there's no absolutes, except I just made an absolute statement saying that there are no absolutes. These are the basic presuppositions of the worldview that we're given, and at that level, they're circular, and they can't justify themselves even within their own worldview. So I think this is a really important aspect of what we see here is this kind of schizophrenic worldview that we're given. We're given this worldview that we came from slime. We are a highly evolved slime mold. And we share a common ancestor with bananas, and so hey, therefore we should eat dirt, right? If we share a common ancestor with monkeys, we should eat a vegan diet. If we share a common ancestor with slime mold, we should eat dirt. So there's a lot. I know I just laid out a lot and kind of threw out a Jackson Pollock type
No, it was brilliant, and
canvas.
that's what I love, is the way you tie all these things in. You know, sometimes I try and link people to your stuff, and they go, "Oh, look, he's a climate denier," and it's just here's the thing that worries me. I've come through the whole spiritual thing, you know, and I've been in this TM movement and whatever, and my whole sort of search was for this elusive enlightenment, and this went on for many years. And as I never got that narrow-mindedness. I don't understand it. For some reason, I seem to be, I was pretty fooled. But if somebody had come up to me when I was vegan and said, "Do you realize how many animals get killed? Do you realize how you know, some people have actually healed on a fully carnivore diet?" I'd have gone, "God, that's interesting." I've never understood this business where you get totally stuck in one view, and I see it over and over again now. You know, there's something about the way that they're feeding people, and the more they go towards a vegan diet, even the ones who are like lacto-ovo vegetarian now, which are most of my friends up here getting very, very sick as they get into their 50s, 60s, they just can't see it. They'd rather die than eat the ancestral food. You can, some of them will watch. I think that Barry Groves thing is so beautiful. It's just, you can't really refute that one. It's one of the best talks ever. And you look at it and you see about the digestive system. And some of them will say, "Oh God, okay, I see what you mean." And some of them won't even look at it. But once you start to get into the climate, they put another layer on that, and it's too much for the plant-based brain.
Conditioned, right?
They can't see
That's
it.
the thing.
Yeah, they can't see it, but they cannot break out of it to see the subtleties. And this is what's so frightening. You know, I talk to the average McDonald's eater, and they have far more of an open mind than the vegans and vegetarians, even the ones that are not militant. There's something about, and I don't know what it is. I don't know whether it's more 5G or it's more artificial light or some shit like that. I don't know why it's affecting people now more than it was back in the 70s, 80s, when we'd have had more of an open mind. Why do you think there's some reason that it's escalating? And these people are just so fucking dim. I mean, that sounds awful.
It's generational. It's like the degeneration is now generational. Right?
Yeah,
so you had the baby boomers, and they're one of the first generations that was kind of fed on this diet of mass media, mass mind control media, and kibble, right? So a lot of the rural knowledge that people have had about how to feed themselves, how to grow their own food, that's been programmed and trained out of us. Now we're trained like dogs to be little social media consumers, basically. I mean, the new global citizen, right? It used to be the American citizen, and there was this idea of manifest destiny in the American, where I lived, right, in the U.S. It was this idea of, American exceptionalism, and we have to spread freedom all around the world. We have this amazing idea of plurality and freedom and equality and justice and all these great feel-good words that are ultimately meaningless within that worldview that's proposing them, right? Like, what does equality mean? What does liberty mean? What is liberty, eternity, liberty, fraternity, and equality? What does this mean? I mean, this is the cause of the French Revolution that ended up in a giant bloodbath. Liberty, fraternity, equality, the Masonic Creed. It's meaningless. What is liberty? Oh, you get to do what you want. Well, what is, you can't even define equality. What is equality? Is this equality of outcome? Does this mean if everyone's dead, isn't everyone equal? What about if everybody is economically equal? If we all have the same amount of stuff, then everyone's equal. But, how can we all have the same amount of stuff? Everything's a little bit different, right? Like, even this side of the mountain that I live on is a very different microclimate than the other side. So you can't give everybody equality of environment without having, this non-existent, platonic hologram environment matrix where everybody lives. So a lot of these statements that are made about the society we live in, they're just so schizophrenic, they're so contradictory, and they make no sense. And I think that's what we're seeing. We're seeing people living out a worldview that is that they're conditioned with, and the worldview is completely schizophrenic. It's completely contradictory in and of itself. It's unfulfilling, and it's false. It makes false claims about reality that we are seeing right in front of us all the time. So I think, after World War II, we saw a major consolidation of control over resources and over the what would you call it? The mass media. You had radio, you had television, you had Hollywood movies that are being beamed out around the entire planet, telling people what it means to be human, giving people images, repetitive images, repetitive language that imprints on them, on their psyche, and tells them exactly how it is that they should respond to stimulus around them, how they should treat people, how they should speak, how they should view things like sexuality, food, culture, family, right? In the U.S., what are those images that we're getting? We get Homer Simpson. You get Family Guy. You get degenerate, deadbeat dads who want to do nothing else but, be promiscuous or get drunk at the bar with their buddies and zone out and drone out drown out the feeling that something is not right, that they could be doing something better. And we have right now, I think, a society that is very, very pent up, that is very, very divided up into little co-opted cults that are you can market to, that you can market ideas through these cults, just like the vegan activists that we see. And the average person, the average Western consumer, is a product. They're not just the product of their environment, which the elite believe they are. I don't believe that we're that. I believe we have free choice. Right? I believe we actually have direct access to truth and revelation. But the people who run this kind of set up the system that we have now believe that we're just automatons. We're just robots. We're just biological machines that respond to external stimulus. And they've created an environment of external stimulus that demands conformity to an ever-changing landscape of values and of shifting tides of subjectivism. Like it's all like everything is just subjective, we're told. And it's all just, hey, whatever you want to do, man. Like that was kind of the boomers thing, was do your own thing, man. Do your own thing. Do what thou will.
The trouble is there's a real subtlety in that, isn't there? One of the things that pisses me off about the spirituality thing is it's always get rid of the ego, become desireless. And this to me is absolute nonsense, because we're given desires, and that creates our interest, that creates our individuality. And now, with all of this kibble and whatever that we've fed and all of this shit, all
kibble
of
on every level, right?
Yeah, the electronic kibble.
Get audio kibble, sexual kibble. It's all there.
Yeah, there it is. And so
the buffet of kibble.
And so we can't do it. I remember there was one sort of guru who was a little bit probably more wise than most gurus, and he was going on about this, and then somebody stood up and said, yeah, but if everybody did what they wanted, then everybody would go around raping and murdering. And he just said, well...
And that's what we have.
Yeah, now we do, but not if you've got some healthy body and mind. And he said, well, would you want to do that? And he said, no. He said, well, there you go. Very few people on the planet really want to do that. There's always going to be the odd one doing that. But I've noticed among people who've come over from vegetarianism, veganism to carnivore, they often really find their life path as well. You see their whole mental capacity opening up and seeing through some of this stuff. And gradually, they find out what they actually want to do. And this is probably very dangerous.
The truth has to be suppressed. I think we all have, the truth is there. The truth is right in front of us, right? Stands at the door knocking. And we keep the door shut. And people say, I don't hear that. I don't hear that little voice in the back of my head that's telling me, stop being a fucking degenerate and get your shit together. I don't hear that. I'm just going to watch porn. Then I'm going to go watch Fox News or CNN or MSNBC, and that's going to tell me what's going on in the world and how to interpret all the signs that I'm seeing on all the billboards that are flashing, these images at me to direct my behavior. And people we get lost in that, rather than taking a step back and saying, oh, hold on a minute, something's seriously wrong here and we're being duped. It gets drowned out. And but when you start to eat correctly, when you start to get your life together, you have a little bit more energy, you got a little bit more space to actually take note of what's going on, and people start questioning other things. So I think what's cool about the whole carnivore thing, people get so disillusioned with the crap ideas that they're given about nutrition, and it becomes so patently obvious to us that we're being fed, we're being given a carnival of kibble as far as nutrition information goes, and then they just start to question other things too. Why is this? Why do people want to control what people eat? Why do people want to control what people say? Why do people want to control how people behave? And what is really going on at the grand scale, kind of on the on what Zbigniew Brzezinski called the grand chessboard of the world. And I think most of us have been conditioned to think very one-dimensionally about most things, and we're given really simplistic and very emotional cues environmentally and through mass media on how to respond to stimulus. And yeah, it's amazing though how many people are kind of open now to looking at things differently. I mean, you had like the whole Jeffrey Epstein thing, this the things that people were saying, the things that I was saying 10, 12 years ago about blackmail rings and these basically degenerate pedos that run a lot of the institutions that we live in. It's not just the Catholic Church. Now it's being revealed the intelligence agencies' connections to Silicon Valley and to blackmail rings that involve heads of state, that involve people like Bill Gates and governments, with this guy Jeffrey Epstein, who somehow committed suicide under suicide watch under some of the most tightly controlled situations within the penal system in a federal prison, where the cameras malfunctioned and the guards fell asleep and forgot to check on him for several hours. We're seeing people realize that there's a lot more going on here, and that there's that's not so simple as we're being told, kind of in the standard narrative. So I think
there was one thing that you said recently that really got me thinking, was the levels of useful idiots. Like, there are the ones who just can't see through anything, and then there are the ones who can see through certain things, and they become probably even more useful because they appear to be progressive in so many ways, and yet they're very useful in other ways. I see it on the Carnivore Group, and I'll probably upset a few people by saying this, but I don't really talk about it, I just watch it going on. But I see, and every time something like vaccines or climate change comes up, you get these people who've seen through the whole diet thing, and yet they go absolutely crazy and start calling people deniers. And then
emotional,
it's funny, it's so you see people seeing things on all levels. Now, I don't have any strong opinions about stuff that comes through the media. I just go, if I don't know, I just go, I don't know. I'll wait until it unfolds and I'll look at all sides. But I can't understand
what's going on here.
These people, they come down on one side of something that they can never possibly prove. I keep saying to people with the climate thing, with diet, you can cut all the plants out, you can eat a load of meat, and diseases get better, and it's demonstrable. But with the climate, we've never actually done anything yet. So nobody really actually knows if we get rid of all the cows, it's going to make any difference. Obviously, that's a complete bollocks.
Well, so the climate thing, it becomes so obvious when you look at the solution.
Yeah, like, absolutely. Okay, oh, well, the solutions are clearly wrong. You've got to go for the ancestral
Greta's out there
thing.
saying the world is on fire. Our home is on fire. How dare you question this? They parade this little 16-year-old human shield around, and this little girl is meant to arouse emotion and to arouse these feelings of, we have to protect the youth. Our children are reprimanding us. We must be so bad adults. And the solutions. What are the solutions, right? Well, what are the demands of this movement, the Extinction Rebellion movement, which is funded through organizations like 350.org. 350.org, billions of dollars coming through this NGO that has connections with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundations, that has connections with a lot of these big money foundations like the MacArthur Foundation, which also set up the World Resources Institute, which did a teach-in at the climate emergency protests of Extinction Rebellion. Right, so all around the world, these kids were out in the streets as Greta Thunberg is in front of the UN, all these heads of state, this big scam organization called the UN. You've got Greta Thunberg speaking in front of them on every single television in the whole world. Millions of dollars being pumped into telling us a message. And what is the message? We need the adults to do something now. We need climate action now. And when she's actually questioned about what is this action you want us to take, when she's actually questioned by a reporter on this, and I show this in one of my recent videos, I think it was the most recent video I put out called, it's about animal rebellion. When she's actually questioned about this, she has no answer, right? Because She's not meant to give the answers. She's meant to be a messenger, to be a Chicken Little, just like this little girl that was in front of the UN talking about the evil Iraqis in 1992 are smashing babies on the ground. This like evil a graphic novel version of an evil villain, Saddam Hussein. He's such a mean, bad man. He wants to destroy everything. He hates your freedom. We have to invade this country. We get the same rhetoric from a child, which nobody can question. You can't question the child. But then when you look at what the solutions are, it's all coming from like the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund. It's coming from these big international financiers. It's coming from these big global NGOs, these non-governmental organizations, and big philanthropy, right? Faux philanthropy, I like to call it, like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and the Rockefeller Foundation. And what do? They want more Monsanto. They want carbon taxes, international taxes on everything. You're going to breathe out and you're going to pay taxes on every breath you exhale. And they want to set up this global scam system based around like social credits, essentially. They want to put a price on carbon. They want ecosystem services that'll be provided by guys like Leonardo DiCaprio, who can go and with the money that they're given to their foundation can go buy and own and privatize the Amazon so that they can own huge swaths of land and get paid carbon credits for owning that land while they're mining it and selling those resources off and kicking off the indigenous people off of that land. They want to get paid for it in this giant big scam called the new climate economy. And we're seeing now talk about the new Green Deal and a new deal for nature. So they're hearkening back to these programs, these so-called progressive programs of development that we saw in the United States, and we're seeing this put forth as the solution to this global climate crisis. So the house is on fire. We're at war with the climate. War propaganda, red lights, sirens. We're all going to die. The world's going to end. What's the solution? Pay more taxes, give up all your land, give control over all resources to the adults who know how to ration them out to us and will save the population. It's absolutely ridiculous. It's the biggest scam that's ever been perpetuated that we know about in modern history. And it's really, really ridiculous when you start looking at where the money's coming from. We're looking at the biggest polluters in the world who are promoting the climate crisis in order to further consolidate global resources and the economy and create a controlled society where everybody's equal. Everybody will be equally poor. Everybody will be equally rationed their kibble. And everybody will be disconnected from their knowledge on how to feed themselves, their knowledge on where they come from, their knowledge on what's really going on here in what these people have planned as this complete technocracy, total controlled society, like 1984 style, Brave New World style, Logan's Run, THX 1138 dystopia that they're selling to us as the Garden of Eden. So real light.
How optimistic or pessimistic are you? Do you think you and I are just pissing in the wind talking about this stuff, or do you think there's some tide of people waking up? I think so many people are waking up seeing this, particularly at least on a dietary level and on a sustainable farming level, and they can see that we've got very few years left because the soil's dying. There's been the demise of other civilizations, as Leah Keith always points out with her agripocalypse. And so, do you think most people are just too full of kibble to ever realize that this obvious thing is going on, that it's the environment and not the climate? Or do you think that people are actually going to start eating the odd steak and wake up a bit and figure out where their actual proper ancestral food's coming from? Where do you think we're headed?
Honestly, I mean, I can't predict what's going to happen. I'll say this. Where we're at right now, I saw it coming, and I thought it was going to take a lot longer. Right, so like 10 years ago when we came to Ecuador, what we see going on, all of the destabilizations, Hong Kong, now Ecuador being destabilized, this global destabilization that we're seeing now, a lot of people have been talking about this for a long time, and they saw it coming. I didn't think it would happen so quickly. I didn't think that it would happen uh, so fast. And I think there's a lot of things that are coming down the pipeline. They're going to wake a lot of people up, and it's not going to be easy. Like where this is going, it's not going to be a simple road. It's like the frog's being boiled really slowly. Right? You put the frog in the pot, and it doesn't jump out if you turn the heat up very, very slow.
That's a great analogy.
So yeah,
I love that. Perfect.
I'm not pessimistic. And I'm not pessimistic. I don't think that this is all like it's all going to shit, like it's all going to be so terrible. But I got to be honest, like I don't see there being, and I don't believe that there is worldly salvation in this. Right? Now this comes down, like it all really does come down to the spiritual level and where this all comes from. Are we just random billiard ball processes bouncing around in a random universe that evolved out of slime mold and became shrews, and then it became monkeys, and then it became a caveman, and now it became this global civilization? I mean, I don't buy that. I don't buy that narrative. Like, I think that we're made in the image of God. I think that we're created. I think that everything we see, everything we experience, is constantly bearing witness to these facts that we don't control all of this, that this is a created situation. And I don't think that we're going through this linear point A to point B to point C evolution of species. It seems to me very obvious that we're degenerating as a culture, right? So that your basic presuppositions about where we come from are really, really important, and they're going to inform how you interpret this. So if you interpret this as the natural evolution of society, there's nothing wrong with it. There's nothing wrong with dominating the human will, with completely subjugating all of the peoples and creating a dystopian technocracy. There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with using your will in any way. In the scientific worldview, in the Darwinian worldview, if you kill everyone else, then you're the king of evolution, right? If you kill all the males, me and you, get rid of all the other males, and we just keep our select group super hot females that we can breed with, and then we win the evolutionary race, which is, ultimately endless and meaningless. But I don't believe that that's true. I don't think that's how it works. So I think, really what it comes down to is what we believe about where we come from. Were we created, or are we just random? Is this all just a natural process of evolution where we were once we were pond scum, and now we're highly evolved monkeys with spaceships? This is what amuses me. It's
I see so much humor in creation. I mean, okay, gorillas look a bit like us, particularly how blokes look like these days with the big stomach.
Therefore, you were a gorilla once.
Yeah. So they're eating all this crap. They're eating hundreds of pounds of vegetable matter, and they're eating their own shit. And so it's great, isn't it? There's this joke of, okay, they look a bit like that. And then the sort of people who would choose an apple over a snake in the Garden of Eden, which was an unwise dietary choice. And so now they're a bit too stupid to see through all of this business about gorillas. It's so funny. I mean, I wanted to ask you about where your spirituality comes from. Where's that rooted? Yeah. I've heard that you've got kind of Christian roots and stuff, but I've never heard you talk about it.
No, yeah. So I grew up as like an atheist, right? Like, as an agnostic. I was never blatantly atheist, although thinking back now, I mean, the way I look at it now, both my parents, they were atheists, right? So we grew up in a non-religious family. My parents taught us virtues, right? You don't steal. You don't act like a piece of shit. You don't hit people. You don't hurt people. But I also remember when I was a kid, I remember having a conscience, and I remember breaking that conscience at times and lying, right? And like being tempted to steal, right? Like I remember, stealing money from my mom's wallet when I was in elementary school, and like kind of justifying it and getting through this, like at first it felt really bad. It was really hard, but then it got easier the more I did it. Right. So yeah, like I had so many experiences as a
I got to
kid
admit, I did
that
that as
now,
well. I did that as well, man.
right?
I'd forgotten all about that. I remember raiding my mum's wallet. Yeah, yeah. Never raid my
For sure, man.
dad's.
Like, oh, mom's got a bunch of 20s in there. She's not gonna
Uh,
notice one of those is gone. And like, man, like now I think back and it's like that was a slippery slope. I mean, I remember one time trying to steal a baseball card from my friend, and this was like a big. I mean, I was 10 years old, I think, fourth grade, and we would get baseball cards, and we would try to, either get the holographic ones, and those are like worth something or whatever. They look shiny and they're cool. And I just remembered, trying to steal one, like put it in my pocket, and just having this urge to do something that I knew was wrong and that would be destructive to my friendship there. And yeah, so I mean, I just remember moments like that as a kid. And I got into a lot of New Age philosophy during high school, messing around with like magic mushrooms and stuff, and having certain realizations and feelings about reality that led me to read guys like Alan Watts. And I remember reading like Nature, Man and Woman, this book on Zen Buddhism, and started studying all these Eastern religions and comparative religion, and reading guys like Huxley, Doors of Perception, and the Perennial Philosophy, and really buying into a lot of this stuff. Really being into, like, I was into Hunter Thompson and stuff, and was just very, very interested in my own hedonistic, like, just lived a pretty hedonistic life at that time. Like, hey, the only law is gravity, right? Like, that's like what's keeping me from doing what I want? What's keeping me from taking what I want? Nothing, just my own perception. Those kind of ideas of, like, the human potential movement's really big with this stuff. I was really into all this, and but I had like certain experiences, certain spiritual experiences that really humbled me and kind of freaked me out to a certain extent, and experiences that I can't really explain rationally, that are very, very difficult to explain. But at the time, I tried to explain them to people. So I had certain experiences that led me to believe that there's something way more than just the physical world.
was that
Right?
were some of them on shrooms and some of them off shrooms, or what happened there?
No, but I had all those experiences at first, and those just basically were like, I had this feeling like, oh, I can do anything. Like, I can do what I want. Like, I can manifest what I want. Like, I get to choose my experience. Those are like the standard New Age ideas, right? Of like, the only thing that's keeping me back are my own mental blocks. And yeah, sure, like that is true, I guess, to a certain extent, but it's also, that's not the whole truth, right? Like, there's certain mental blocks and emotional blocks that you might have to, like, raping and murdering, that why do you have that? I guess the scientific worldview would say, oh, it's just like that evolved because, you're living in groups and you have to maintain peace and harmony in your relationships. You don't want to kill anybody unless it's necessary because you could be, forming alliances, and because evolution, right? It's just the scientific worldview is like everything equals cause evolution, and it's just, there's no explanation of in between. There's just this assumption of like, oh, look, well, we eat how we do today, obviously because we evolved to do it, right? Like, evolution isn't stupid. The impersonal random processes of evolution are not stupid. She knows what she wants, bro. It's like, it's this deification of evolution. So it's like, I don't know. I always saw this being really contradictory, and I always thought, I just remember being a kid and being like middle school and being taught about the Big Bang, and I didn't see any difference. Like, when you get down to it, it's like, okay, well, the Big Bang was, there was nothing and then there was something. How did this come about? We don't know, but we know that there must have been nothing, and that something must have come out of that nothing because, like, evolution or whatever. We're told this, and it's like, well, wait, we didn't observe this? We didn't observe the Big Bang, yet in the scientific worldview, everything that is real must be observed, right? So it's like, who observed this happening? Nobody. We're assuming. I mean, so I realized that science is based on faith, right? The basic tenets of science require faith. They require faith in other people's observation most of the time, right? It's like, everything in the world can be explained through science. Well, did science tell you that? Do you know that through science, that everything can only be known through science? So it's like, these never made sense to me. I didn't really know how to vocalize it at that time. I didn't really know how to how to explain it, but it never made sense to me. And yeah, I mean, those experiences that I had with like the New Age movement and with the whole psychedelic world in Southern California, growing up in California, being exposed to all the counterculture movements that, the festivals, the mushrooms, LSD, DMT, all this stuff that you see now being pushed in the mainstream. I was really into that in high school and college. And ultimately, I found it empty. Ultimately, I found it led to hedonism and an emptiness where it's like, okay, everything's God. Then nothing matters. Like ultimately, that's the outcome. If everything is subjective and everything is relative, and we have infinite lives, and we're just and this might just be an illusion, bro, or like this is maybe just maybe it's just a simulation. Okay, if it's just a simulation, and we're just going to reincarnate, and this is just this avatar that's constantly reincarnating, climbing the evolutionary ladder of souls, then it doesn't matter if I just try and take control of everything around me and dominate everyone around me so I can get as comfortable as I can in the physical world. It doesn't matter, because if I'm wrong, hey, hit the reset button. Start back at level 1 before Bowser. Then you'll get back to Bowser and you take a different route. It's like it never, I don't know, to me it became really obvious like that is not true. And also, if it were true, then nothing matters and it's empty. So, I don't know. I mean, eventually, I ended up believing in, and I think the truth is revealed, right? For there to even be truth, for there to be objective truth, it requires something outside of ourselves, right? It requires something greater than our own intellect. For there to be continuity of nature, for there to be even the scientific method, for there to be truth at all, it requires something far greater than us. And in the Christian worldview, that's God. Right? So I actually believe in orthodoxy, in the worldview of Eastern Orthodoxy, as you see in like the Russian Orthodox Church, the Bulgarian Church. Yeah, that's what I came to. I mean, this is a very long conversation. I'm obviously not going to explain every step along the way with much accuracy in a really short sound clip type fashion. But yeah, for there to exist right and wrong, continuity of nature, objective truth, it requires God. It requires something outside of our own solipsistic, subjective reality. And truth has to be revealed from outside. So yeah, that's, I don't know where to go from there.
No, that's cool. I mean, I think this is what a lot of people miss. They get into that everything is one, and they just end up so spaced out. And to me, that is also fed by the people who feed that to people, that spiritual kibble. Then they feed the actual dietary kibble, and it keeps them on that level. If chakras exist, they're stuck in the high chakras. And we have this thing about high. Like, what's wrong with the lower chakras? What's so unimportant about the foundation of a house? And then once you've got that, but there's also so many levels all at once. You know, all of those levels that you're talking about are there as well. I think this comes when people do have these awakenings, and then they're spaced out for a couple of years, and either they stay like that and they're just useless, or they have some kind of stabilization. And there's a guy who I want to get on the podcast who has lived with a load of these quite famous Indian gurus, and he's found out that a lot of them did not stabilize their awakenings till they ate a shitload of meat. And he sort of brings this out, and it's something that nobody even knows about. I mean, in the old Ayurvedic texts, you can see it. I think people are totally disconnected, so they get this idea of spirituality that it's total disconnect. Yeah. And I'm with you, man. Wherever it comes from, we're here. We're both and. You know, we're all everything all at once, but we're also right here.
The question becomes, though, is it all illusion? Is it all one? Is it all Maya? Or is this real? Right? I think that's the really fundamental questions that people need to ask themselves. And to me, it never was none of these Eastern religions and none of those explanations ever made any sense of what I experienced in the world, which some of the things that it never made sense out of is the existence of evil and what is right and wrong, right? These Eastern religions, they don't provide a framework that we can justify any action towards good or bad. They don't even justify good or bad, right? It's like, so in the Christian worldview, we believe we're all made in the image of God and that there was a fall. And I think every single religion tries to account for the fall, even the scientific worldview, even the vegan religion. The vegan religion is always trying to account for this feeling that we're exceptional from nature, this feeling of repulsion that we have at death, right? We don't want to die. Why is that? In the scientific worldview, we should be willing to die, perfectly willing to die if it's necessary. Death is just the other side of life. We wouldn't have life without death, is what the a lot of the Eastern religions, these dualistic and monistic ways of looking at things, that's what they believe. The only satisfying answer to that, I believe, is explained through the theology of the fall. Right? Right and wrong, good and bad. Everybody's always going back to this Garden of Eden. The story of Eden, the history of the Garden of Eden, we're always trying to explain that. And even the vegans believe that death is not natural, that we don't need to kill animals, and that it's bad that we're killing animals. Why do they feel that? Why do we feel repulsed by murder, rape, theft? And why do we seek this good that's not even accounted for within the scientific worldview or within the Eastern religions? In the Eastern religions, life is suffering. In Buddhism, life is suffering, right? I mean, that's a basic explanation of Buddhism, right? Am I misrepresenting it?
No, that sounds about right, doesn't it? It sounds about right. And so, you've always got to turn the attention inwards and focus on consciousness, pure consciousness, or whatever, to get away from the suffering in the outside world.
To end suffering. Liberation from suffering is nirvana. But life is suffering. So life is suffering. Suffering is bad. We have to get rid of life to end suffering. That's the logical conclusion of this worldview. Right? I mean, it's like it's very, to me, just on that level. And of course, a lot of Buddhists, they might be offended. I'm not trying to, insult anybody out there. I'm just sharing my thoughts and my view on this. I believe it's very contradictory right there. If life is suffering, then why should we want to get rid of suffering? Right? How is suffering bad? And it's almost like a genocidal philosophy right there. And it's never made sense to me. But the fall really does actually it's the only coherent way of reconciling with what we see, what we experience around us. And there's a really good book. It's really long, but he gives a very good explanation of Genesis and of the fall. And it's a book by Father Seraphim Rose, and he was a student of Alan Watts, actually. He was a former New Age type guy. He gave some lectures. He gave one lecture in Santa Cruz, which was really funny. He's talking to these kids at the university there, where I went. I went to the University of California, Santa Cruz. And here he's talking to a lot of these Oshoites and a lot of people who are into the Rajneesh movement and the New Age stuff. And he's giving a basic explanation of what orthodoxy is, what true Christianity is. Orthodoxy being very distinct and separate from the Roman Church that we see today, the Roman pedocracy and the Protestant evangelical movement, the prosperity the theology, and a lot of these other weird denominations. Eastern Orthodoxy is very, very separate from those in that we have a specific interpretation of Genesis, of Scripture, and this book, Genesis, Creation, and Early Man by Father Seraphim Rose. Really, really good book that actually explains the theological importance and the Orthodox beliefs on the fall. So, I mean, we believe that death is not natural, right? That's one thing that I think is really fascinating. Death, how does a worldview reconcile with death? We believe death is not natural. The reason that we have an aversion to death is because we were not created and meant to die, right? That we were created in the image of God, in the image and likeness of God. And then after the fall, through our own free will, death came into existence, not as this terrible punishment, but actually part of the mercy of God, and that we don't have to live separately from God forever in this fallen state that that is continuously becoming more and more disconnected from the truth and from nature. right? So the basic presuppositions on what nature is are also very, very important. You hear somebody like Sverige who says, oh, nature, it's natural to eat babies. It's natural to, to dominate everybody and to kill. And if you're not a carnivore, if you don't want to eat babies, you are mentally ill. It's like, within that, his worldview, he's actually being consistent with the materialistic, nihilistic worldview there. Whereas he's considering nature as everything we see around us. Whereas like in orthodoxy, the nature that people coming from the Darwinian worldview or the nihilistic worldview or the neo-pagan worldview, they believe that nature is what we see around us, right? This is the natural order, that life consumes life, that death is part of that, and that rape, murder, pillage, and animal dominance, and the animal dominance hierarchy that we see, that's nature. Whereas in orthodoxy, we believe that the reason that human beings, this is the only worldview that actually accounts for this, the reason human beings have an aversion to these things, right? The reason that we don't like death, that we don't that we don't embrace murder, is because these things didn't exist and weren't part of nature, right? That God created everything as good. God created all things visible and invisible, and that his creation was good. But through our choices, through being given free will, we've entered this fallen state that we now deal with and that we now live in. So I think, our views about death, our views about nature and what nature is, these are all really of fundamental importance. And in the Western worldview, which includes, the Roman Church, the Western Church, there is not a coherent way of explaining the phenomena that we see around us. And, good and evil, nature, what is the meaning of the world we see around us? Where does this come from and where is this going? I think it's really, really important. And I do have a lot of critiques of a lot of the people who promote even like the word ancestral diet. I think it's really funny. And there are a lot of assumptions that it's based on. And it usually, when people are assuming, that when you look at ancestral behaviors, that we can be informed about how we should behave now. Well, look, if we're gonna say we should go with our ancestral diet, why shouldn't we include cannibalism? All right, because our ancestral diet here in Ecuador, I mean, just a few generations removed, they're cannibals. There are still cannibal tribes in the Amazon who, in their natural state, consume their enemies and put their heads on sticks and put them up outside of their huts. So that's natural in that worldview. So I think we all inherently have a feeling that that's not a good thing. Like even like general aesthetics of having a bunch of shrunken heads in the hut of your village leader who, enjoys eating children and who keeps a harem of women that when he's done breeding with, consumes them, which this goes on still in the world. There are cannibal tribes still in the world. That I think we all inherently know that that's not a good thing. Now, whether we're just conditioned and we're programmed by modern society to think that that's bad, these are all questions that we have to ask. Or maybe there is some transcendental truth. Maybe there is something beyond ourselves that determines what is true. Of course, we believe that that's God that determines what is true. And we believe that we're in a fallen state, and that's why we see all this, and that's why we're repelled by all this, and we don't want to be partaking in creating these horrors that we see around us in the modern world, in these revolutions, these bloody, violent revolutions, and this constant revolution that we've seen since the Enlightenment, since the fall. I think we all know that that is not ideal. Right, even though we haven't experienced in our lifetimes what is really ideal. I think that reason is that we're given through revelation the truth, and revelation has to come from a source outside of ourselves. It's not just solipsism. I believe that truth comes from God, and it's revealed in our hearts, and it's revealed to us through the Spirit of God. Right. So yeah, I mean, I'm trying to explain really complex theological issues and kind of my view on them. I'm just rambling at this point. I'm not sure where.
No, it's beautiful. It's exactly what I wanted to hear. I haven't heard you go into stuff like that before. I mean, for me now, after all those years in all these sort of movements and spiritual movements and stuff, to me, I think there's only really one thing, well, two things, kind of gratitude and acceptance, but they're pretty much the same thing. And then the more that you get into that, the more that you can accept suffering if it comes up, because it's always going to be there. You don't run away from it. You just learn from it. You know, when I was really sick, it was the time when I learned the most probably ever in my life. I was at 48 years old. I was a little baby in 2010. I didn't really understand anything. I thought I did. I had tremendous Dunning-Kruger. But now the more that I look at something, at everything, the more that I realize I know absolutely nothing about anything. But you just carry on, and you accept, and you have gratitude, and you have a sense of humor. And it's probably very likely that with an attitude like that, you're not going to eat anybody, and you're not going to rape them, and you're not going to kill them. But, you know, it happens out there, it happens and whatever. But it's acceptance. And when people say, I don't understand acceptance, like if I see somebody raping a kid down a side alley, I'm going to go down there.
You should accept that. No, but you should, why not just accept that though? Like that's the natural
because I think
those people's karma.
Yeah, I think but it's also your karma to have the desire to go down there and help.
But what if that person who's performing the rape is just living his truth? He's living his own truth, Bill.
He is probably, but then I'm living my truth by going down there and trying to stop him. You know what I mean?
But why? How do you know that that's true? That you should stop him?
I don't. I absolutely don't. This is why I say we need to go with what our heart says and our desires. I really don't know what's right and wrong anymore. But I appear to be upsetting and harming people a lot less, even unwittingly, than when I thought I understood what right and wrong was. Do you know what I mean?
Well, how do we know what is harming somebody, right? Because even that's like, how do we know that, right? Like now we see with the climate change movement, we have this rhetoric that's telling us humans are so bad, humans are terrible, we're destroying the planet, you know, the whole world is dying, the planet is on fire, and it's because of us. So then this, you know, we're telling children that they're destroying the world, that they're destroying everything, and you know, it's how do we know that it's not a good thing if we like bring back euthanasia at a mass scale and start euthanizing the unproductive, useless eaters, the extra people of the world, right? So I think, all right. So what about like can't our heart and our mind also be influenced to think that things that are not true are true?
Absolutely. Look at the vegans freaking out about killing Bambi. Right? You know? Yeah. I mean, there's all that stuff. Yeah, this is incredibly complex and difficult to navigate through. And I think if anybody ever claims to be completely enlightened or whatever, I think that's just nonsense. It's always a path. Sometimes we go back a bit. Sometimes we go round and round a bit, you know? But it's such a beautiful thing to just watch it all go by. I guess it's also just comes with age, you know. I'm an old fucker now. And so I tend to sort of relax into things a lot more. But I also have my times when I freak out, but that passes very quickly. But I don't know what's going on. You see, there would have been a time when I would have said, oh, anybody who's into anything to do with Christianity, oh, no, it's got to be all this whole one and things like that. Now I don't have anything like that. I just think the stuff that you've been saying there has been so fascinating. And there's no difference to me between any outlook and belief that just brings somebody some joy and keeps them on their path. You know, it's been great.
What about Charlie Manson? I mean, he had joy from like a really dark ecstasy, you know, psychopathic place. I mean, what about people who get joy and fulfillment from genocide?
Yeah, I know. Bizarre. When I'm God, I'll tell you.
I just think it's funny. So like you look at, I mean, we're talking about, you know, being influenced to believe things that are bad. I mean, we've got the Atlantic talking about climate change may cause 26,000 more U.S. suicides by 2050. We need to talk. Climate change is making people suicidal. So it's like here we have media basically planting the idea and telling us that, you know, look, climate change, this worldview that we're programming you with is making people suicidal. This is so bad. But then at another level, they're also seeding that idea into the populace that like, look, this is just normal. Climate change is making people kill themselves. I was like, what do you mean climate change? You mean all the propaganda, all the repetitive images and words that you're giving people about this apocalyptic fake situation that, you know, the world is ending because of them? You know, it's it's a funny thing. So it's like, why, if these people's heart and conscience is telling them you're bad, you're terrible because you're destroying the planet, and they kill themselves, in that worldview, it might just be a good thing, right? And I think that this is like the whole subjective, everything is subjective worldview. It just leads to a state where nobody can justify any action, good or bad, and it all becomes like whatever feels good. And I think that I don't know. To me, that's where I was for a long time, and I really struggled with that. And I think that that's where our society is. That's what we're seeing right now, is the manifestation of that kind of schizophrenic state that comes from those beliefs, that nihilistic worldview. And I think that this is a tool not only for behavioral control, but also at the spiritual level, it's a very demonic philosophy that justifies absolutely anything. A really good book that I enjoy a lot is Father Seraphim Rowe's Nihilism, The Root of the Revolution of the Modern Age. This book's it gives a really good breakdown of some of the important critiques on modernism and on kind of the nihilistic scientism worldview. This isn't like saying that I reject science and I reject the truth, or that I reject my own observations. No, the scientific worldview in and of itself rejects its own presuppositions, right? The scientific worldview says that all truth comes from observation. But that in and of itself can't be observed. That truth has never been observed, so it's self-contradictory right there. And this book, he does a really good job of breaking down kind of the history of the revolutionary movements, all these bloodbaths that we've seen since the Enlightenment, the French Revolution, the American Revolution, and now the global revolution, which, the Club of Rome, they called it the first global revolution. It's probably not the first global revolution, but it does a really good job of explaining the worldview and the history of these ideas and why we see what we see today, kind of manifesting. And I think he's absolutely correct in his assertions that nihilism and the worldview that we're given today of subjectivism, moral subjectivity, and that everything is subjective is very, very dangerous, and the logical result of that is exactly what we see now, like just revolutions, bloody revolutions, power struggle, animalistic domination over others, and ultimately it seems to me that if we just accept, okay, everything is just what it is, and we just try to be happy, that's not a good starting point to create a coherent society and to create a coherent worldly solution to this. And I don't think that there is really a worldly solution that's ultimately going to save us all. It's not like a global communism is just going to save everything, and if we just seize the means of production, it will be okay. It's like all these solutions we're given, they end up being the same. They end up manifesting the same issues, right? You look at what happened with the Bolshevik Revolution, which was all about equality. It was all about overthrowing the forces of oppression in the world. I mean, this ended up in the slaughter of the 30 million plus Christians in Russia, and it ended up with the slaughter of much of the population, the kulaks in the Ukraine, ended up with the slaughter of a lot of rural people, and it ended up horrific. And so I think until we stop and we really observe this, we're probably going to end up seeing more kind of the same revolutionary spirit that manifests, and we're going to see it on a global scale because we have a global society now that's speaking the same language and that believes the same things. But that's not to say there's no hope. I think there is hope, just not in that system.
Yeah, exactly.
Hope is in God and in what transcends that, what created that, and what ultimately is good. So I think there is good and bad, and I think we know that inherently, and we seek what is good. I think we do a really bad job, most of us, at understanding why that is. And yeah, so that's Eastern Orthodoxy actually gives what I believe is the only coherent worldview to explain this, and that gives us tools to understand the meaning of suffering. Right? Whereas Buddhism says life is suffering, we have to reach enlightenment through getting rid of all suffering. We give a different meaning to suffering, right? Suffering comes to us because of the fall, because of sin, because sin being the movement of the will away from good. And what is good? Good is the will of God, who created us in his image and likeness with the ability to choose good or evil. Evil not being a created thing. We're not like there's this like dark entity and then there's this light entity and we're stuck in between, this yin yang type situation, and we have to balance the forces. We don't believe in that. We don't believe that everything is illusion, that everything is Maya. We don't believe that either. We believe that there is good and bad, that we're created in the image and likeness of God, and that we do have access to salvation through lining up our will with the will of God. And that is how we do good, through doing the will of God, which is revealed to us through revelation. It's also revealed through Scripture, and it's written on our hearts. So that's how we see.
That's beautiful, man. I mean, I see that this business of there is a solution, but it's never, like Einstein said, you can never get a problem on the level of the problem itself. And I think that's beautiful. I think that's a really, really nice bit to finish on. I've milked your udders of exactly what I wanted to get out of you, man. That's just fantastic.
I'm sure I've done a terrible job of explaining it.
No, you really haven't. No, you really haven't.
I'm not. I hope I did good. I think. I don't know, man.
I think the important thing is to make people see how all of these levels tie in. Do you know what I mean? Because the only chance we've got of seeing what the hell's going on is to see it on all of these different levels and every single little bit of the tumor that's going through society,
Absolutely.
And I think you've expressed it beautifully, and just thank you so much. And yeah, there we go, man. Thank you so much. I'm gonna wrap.
Thanks for having me on, man. I wish I could have done a better job. I think we all constantly fall short of the glory of God and of the grace that God gives us. And I've done a lot of things in my life that were not good. And I think we all are created in the image and likeness of God, and we use our will to either line up with that truth or reject it. And I spent a lot of my life chasing my tail. I spent a lot of my life hurting other people, and may God have mercy on me. I think that's really what it comes down to. When you start to see the extent of evil that really is in the world. Sorry, I'm getting a little bit choked up right now, as the country I live in is being destabilized, and potential genocide is being set up here in South America, a place where there have been many genocides in the past in these in the places where we all live. There have been slaughters. There have been terrible things that have happened, and we live in this time where it's very comfortable. And I hope that I hope that everybody could get something out of this conversation, and that people can actually come to some rational conclusions on what it is we experience here and what it is we're seeing in the realms of diet, of geopolitics, politics, and what's going on in our own families and in our communities and inside of ourselves. So yeah, Phil, thanks for having me on, man. Really appreciate it. Really appreciate the conversation. This is a better conversation to have for like 12 hours over like a nice fire or something. But
I know. Maybe we'll expand on it sometime in a live one. This is just for the podcast, give people a taste. But I think you've just nailed it beautifully. Thank you so much, Tristan.